Alrighty, y'all. So this is Diesel We the People News. Alright. This video is without prejudice and or without recourse. Alrighty. I'm not an attorney. I'm not giving legal advice. Why? Because I'm not an attorney. I never look just straightforward. I always look around me to be able to protect myself by any means necessary. Okie dokie. So I'm glad we got that out of the hand. I did a video, I guess, last night sometime, according to this video, and talked about KrisAnne Hall a little bit, and they brought up a little smidgen of sheriff. So I actually backtracked some because, well, she don't have channel anymore. I wonder why. Alright, we cannot have people learning our rights and not suffer the consequences of it. Right? So let's find out about the sheriff's authority.
I promised everybody yesterday that we were going to talk about a constitutional sheriff today. And we're going to do a Liberty First University class right here online.
Well, it's important in some of these things because, you know, like the quarantines and closing businesses and things that are actually not lawful, not constitutional, and not even lawful in many states.
Right.
This would be an area where sheriffs stand up and say, no, we're not going to allow you to do that here.
And so we were meeting with some people the other day, and I was explaining about how I do this teaching all across the country to the sheriffs. Remember, you know, those of you who've been with us for a long time, you know, I just got back from Reno teaching the course for the sheriffs to the sheriffs of 17 states and the Western Sheriffs Association. 3 hours. I mean, that's serious. And they wouldn't let me take a break, JC. We went 3 hours straight. It was phenomenal. We're not doing 3 hours today. We're just doing a segment of the class today. And it has to do with the history of the sheriff. And you know, Patrick Henry said, I have but one lamp by which my feet are guided, and that's the lamp of experience. I know no way to judge the future but by the past. Because the history is our teacher, and it actually is the wisdom that our framers used to create the government that we have today. And the people we were meeting with, I was explaining to this the power of the sheriff and how it's not only the power of the sheriff, but it's the duty of the sheriff to stand up against governments, against not just criminals, but to governments as well. Let me start off by sharing. Somebody had mentioned Brad Rogers up here. And I just want to share with you something that Brad Rogers wrote, because the question was, KrisAnne, how do we show these sheriffs, how do we make them know this? You know, how many sheriffs know this? How do they know this? How do we do this? Well, we have to teach them. We have to teach our sheriffs. But we do have, and one thing I was telling them is we have a large number of sheriffs that are solid out there. You just don't get to hear about them in the news because CNN's not going to cover this kind of stuff. CNN, MSNBC, Fox News isn't going to cover when a sheriff is successful in shutting out the federal government. Now, Brad Rogers used to be the sheriff of Elkhart, Indiana. Now, I say used to, not because he didn't get reelected, but because he termed out. So Indiana has term limits for their sheriffs, and he termed out. But his undersheriff, he was so popular that his undersheriff became the sheriff.
Nice.
Yeah. And so what Brad Rogers in Elkhart, Indiana, he was having a trouble with the USDA and the FDA coming in and raiding his Amish farmers in the dark of the night over weapons of mass destruction. You know, raw eggs, milk, and cheese, right? And so Brad Rogers got so sick and tired of the tyranny of the USDA and the FDA that he penned a letter, and he sent a letter to the USDA, told them to share it with the FDA, and basically told them, if you come into my county again to effectuate any of your effectuate, that's one of those lawyer terms, to serve any of your federal warrants without coming to my office first and getting my express permission, He told the USDA and the FDA, you will have to pick up your agents in my jail because I'm going to arrest them for trespass. Are you catching that? The sheriff is threatening to arrest federal agents for trespass if they don't give his permission to issue a warrant. Now, this was years ago. You never saw federal troops marching into Elkhart, Indiana, or the president trying to put Brad Rogers in prison, or congressmen having some congressional hearing over it. They wanted this to be quiet. Because the truth of the matter is, Brad Rogers never had another problem with the USDA or the FDA. Now, I want to share with you what the response in public was so overwhelming that he did a press release. And I want to share with you the press release because it helps us understand why this lesson on the constitutional sheriff is so important. He says, and I'm quoting, "Your local elected officials can stem the tide of federal overreach if they apply just a little backbone in supporting and defending the Constitution." In big capital letters, he says, expect it, demand it. He says, some bloggers and natural food writers have hailed me as a hero because he was defending the property rights of raw milk and cheese. And he says, I'm no hero. I'm just doing my job. How can our sheriffs do their job if they don't even know what their job is?
Right.
And Brad Rogers knew what his job was. He says, whether you're a conservative, here's his job. Are you ready? Everybody, if you're taking notes, if you're recording this, record it right now. This is the job description of your sheriff. Are you ready? Do-do-do. Whether you are a conservative or a liberal, I will be a guardian of the Constitution for you. And I will not stand idly by while the rights of my county are trampled, whether by criminals or an overreaching government.
Yeah.
That is the job description of your sheriff.
And that
is the first and foremost job description of your sheriff.
And you have kind of a sort of photo negative example, right? The bad side of what happens and how bad can it get when you don't have a constitutional sheriff. You have the other extreme when you see what happened to Lavoy Finicum.
Absolutely.
Like if you had a sheriff like Brad Rogers,
right,
he'd be alive today. But you have a guy there. I mean, so it shows, I think, how important this is.
Yeah, and your sheriff, this is not Chris Ann Hall's opinion. This is actual legal fact. Your sheriff is the top legal authority in your county. Your sheriff is above the governor, above your county commission. He's above the state police. He's above the president. He's above the FBI. He's above the military in your county. There is no higher authority, legally speaking, in your county than the sheriff, which is why. Now, this applies, let me just give you this sort of legal disclaimer. This only applies to the sheriffs where the people have protected the sheriff's power.
Yeah, because the
it's
word got out
falling
about
apart.
these principles.
Yes.
And Delaware,
Yeah.
what was that, Biden's
Biden's son.
Moved to change it, to make sure.
Stripped the sheriffs of Delaware of their arrest authority. Even a sheriff is just simply a guy who serves warrants and posts eviction notices on the doors, and he doesn't do anything. But the sheriff, in the places where the sheriff's authority is true and protected, the sheriff is a constitutionally elected officer, a representative of the people. Now, I want to mention to you from an historical perspective, this didn't happen by accident, right? We didn't just say, oh, let's create this office of a sheriff and let's make the sheriff, the guy who's supposed to protect the rights of the people. That's not how it works. The sheriff is actually the guy who started off in history as an agent of the king. So in 1849, under the king of England by the name of...
By the way, it went in 1849. It was 849. She misspoke.
Where is my brain? King, there he is, Alfred. I was going to say Alfred, but I forgot. Under King Alfred, a sheriff was a representative of the royal authority at the local level. Now, in 849, we didn't have counties, we had these things called shires. And the sheriff was called a reeve. Just so you know, that's where you get your term sheriff. It's a phonetical blending of the words shire reeve. So you say that long enough with a heavy English accent and you get sheriff.
Yeah, you
right?
still have, there are, you still have towns and cities in the Northeast that harken back to that language. That,
right.
Like names that end in shire.
Right.
New Hampshire. I mean,
right.
the whole
Yeah.
state
Yeah.
still has that.
Right. Exactly.
That kind of, and I think Worcester, some of those that are like Worcester, some of that Chester.
Worcester. I got so corrected when I said Worcester. No, it's not Worcester. It's
Worcester.
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 You knew you lived around Baltimore.
Yeah.
Baltimore.
Worcestershire sauce.
Worcestershire. Okay, so the sheriff was the highest authority and the senior official only under the king himself. So he was a hireling of the king. Now, remember the class that I just gave online on the history of the Constitution. So what you have to realize is that this starts in 849. The sheriff, the shire reeve, is a hireling of the king. And so just as a review for this, we then have the Ethelred Agreement in 1014, where we create the limited monarchy. Then we have Edward the Confessor. You guys will remember through that class. By the way, if you haven't had the class and you missed the class on YouTube, the constitutional class is still on YouTube, and you can always become a student at LibertyFirstUniversity.com and get these classes on your own and study at your own time. And we always do them in greater detail at LibertyFirstUniversity.com as well. All right, so then you have Edward the Confessor. Remember, he's the generous king. Then you have William the First, the time.
You may actually have to look it up even a little bit harder now, since she disappeared on this platform.
Tyrant king, the one who said that he was going to overturn the government without the people knowing, fundamentally transform. Then we get his son, William II, the red hairy guy, and then his other son, Henry I. We get the 1100 Charter of Liberties. We're fast forwarding through this because you've already had this class, but you get the 1100 Charter of Liberties, the first promise, the first written promise to the people that the government will not be evil and oppressive anymore. By the way, just a little bit of trivia for you and a reminder, the 1100 Charter of Liberties is where we have codified our principles of separation of church and state, which is going to be very important for us when we have these lockdowns, separation of church and state, okay? Then, we're going to
Now, I just want to bring up for your Englishmen out there, this is y'all's history. We just stretched it into this country, okay? But all she's speaking of is the British English crown.
come to the year 1215. We have a rebellion against John. Remember, John is the massive taxation king. And remember the Disney movie of Robin Hood, right? The Sheriff of Nottingham, in the Robin Hood story, not just in Disney, but anyway, the Sheriff of Nottingham worked for the king. Well, when the rebellion comes against John, and the people force the Magna Carta on John, the entire role of the sheriff changes. In 1215, under Clause 61 of the Magna Carta, the sheriff is no longer a hireling of the government. He is no longer working for the king. The sheriff now works for the people. Now, I want to take a few minutes. I don't like reading a lot on the show, but I want to read to you the part of Clause 61 of the Magna Carta, because this portion of the Clause 61 of Magna Carta, this transformation of the shire reeve into the sheriff that we know today, tells us explicitly what our sheriff is supposed to be doing, all the way back in 1215. Now, when we read this, it's written in the first person because the king is signing a promise. So when we start off and it says, if we are chief justices, our officials, and any of our servants, okay, we say that, right? Well, he's talking about the royalty, the king and the crown. So if we, the royalty, our chief justice or officials, or any of our servants offend in any respect against any man or transgress any of the articles of the peace of this security, and the offense is made known to the 4 of the said 25 barons, remember the royal council, they shall come to us, declare it, and claim immediate redress. This is where we get the right of the people to petition for a redress of their grievances. The 25 barons are the representatives of the people in the king's court. If the king has taken your property unlawfully, if the king is denying you of your rights unlawfully, or a servant is, or someone in the court is, Dutch or Duchess, Duke or lady or whatever, then you go to your representative, the barons, you present to them your case, the representative takes it to the king, okay?
Wait a minute, I thought Thomas Jefferson invented the redress of grievances. You're telling me it was 600 years before he ever showed up on the scene?
Not 600 years.
Before Jefferson.
500 years. 500 years before Jefferson showed up on the scene.
Okie dokie.
Yeah, there you go. So Thomas Jefferson didn't invent the First Amendment either. He didn't do separation of church and state either. Okay? So, now listen, you are following this redress process now, right? So you've had your rights or your property denied by the central government. Let's just make this, by the central government. You've gone to your representative, you've made your claim. Now listen to what happens. This is Clause 61. If we make no redress within 40 days, okay, so they have 40 days to respond. And not just simply respond, but to make you whole. 40 days to restore your rights and to restore your property. Just so we're clear.
Due process.
Due process. The 25 barons who may distrain upon and assail us.
Also, don't respond in 40 days is silence of acquiescence.
In every way possible, okay? With the support of the whole community of the land. Now that word distrain is a violent taking.
Yeah.
It is a violent seizure.
Seize. To seize.
So if the king does not make you whole, your representatives now have the permission of the king and full right under the law to forcefully seize and assail the king, the crown, the royalty, the family, the servants, with the support of the whole community. And here's what you can do. You can seize their castles, plural, lands, possessions, or anything else, saving only our own person and those of the queen and our children, until they have secured such redress as they have determined upon.
You can't legally kill them, but you can take their stuff.
You can't kill them, but you can take all the...
England, that still applies today.
...their stuff until you are made whole.
And that's from the Magna Carta.
That is from the Magna Carta. Now, here's your sheriff. Any man who desires may take an oath to obey the commands of the 25 barons for the achievement of these ends, and to join with them in assailing us to the utmost of his power.
So deputize.
So they are now deputizing, and this will actually now transform over the next centuries into the sheriff, who no longer works for the representatives, but is the representative, right? He doesn't work for the barons, he is the baron.
It's connected to the people. So whereas it
Right.
started connected to the legislature and what would
Right.
become the legislature,
Right.
now he's connected to the
Right,
people.
because the people were connected to the legislature, he was connected to the legislature. Now, over the centuries, he is connected directly to the people, but he still holds the same principled authority, and that's exactly what Brad Rogers said. To not just protect us from criminals, but to protect us from government that acts like a criminal.
So this is essentially the earliest origins in our legal
Yes.
charter history.
In our legal
of what
chartered
is our
history,
founding documents.
yes.
So you said, as you mentioned, connected with the history that this happens in, which you gave the other day, was the charter history
Right.
of our founding documents, of which at least the second is
Right.
Magna Carta.
Right. Now I do want to show I want to show you guys this, because this is important, because this is actually not just Chris Ann Holm making in some conjecture based on history. This is what our founders actually used to codify this power in the entity of our sheriff. We have, let me find this right here, but we have James Madison writing in two separate instances in the Federalist Papers, distinguishing out the power of the sheriff and the local government. Oh, here we go. Like I said, this is like a 3-hour class, and I'm giving you the piecemeal of it. So I'm having to go through this a little bit different. Here it is. All right, so the sheriff is established to be supreme within his jurisdiction, okay? Under Federalist 51, James Madison writes this: hence a double security arises to the rights of the people. The different government will control each other at the same time. Each will be controlled by itself, right? So we're establishing the authority of the local government to control the federal government. Federalist 39 says this: the local or municipal authorities form distinct and independent portions of the supremacy. I want to repeat that again. The local or municipal authorities form distinct and independent portions of the supremacy, no more subject within their respective authorities than the general authority is subject to them within their own jurisdiction. Now, to bring that up into 21st century language, let me explain to you what this means. He is saying the federal government can't show up in your... let me back this up. He is saying your sheriff can't go to Washington, D.C. and enforce the laws of your county in Washington, D.C. And in the same respect, the federal agents can't come into your sheriff's county and enforce federal law, because your sheriff is supreme in his jurisdiction. And what's crazy, JC, I wish that I had a clip. I'm always thinking I need to go and look for these clips. But I remember growing up and watching television shows and movies where the sheriff was and the feds came in and their feds tried to take over, and the sheriff would say, well, you realize this is my jurisdiction now and you don't have any authority here. We used to know that. And I mean, just in the 70s, we knew that.
Right.
30 years later, 40 years later, we've completely forgotten a foundational check and balance, an established protection of the people's power. We've already forgotten that in just 40 years. And now...
And your younger generation may want to ask your grandparents and see if this is true and correct, which it is, by the way. Okay?
We have sheriffs who would think that their only job is to enforce the law, that the federal government is supreme to them. They can't possibly say anything but, they can't even do boo to the federal government, when just 40 years ago we understood what Madison is teaching us right now. And I have to say, it has to be the education system. You cannot change culture that quickly unless you're educating people that that is the correct culture.
Well,
and then toys and money, and you bribe them with grants, and you bribe them with toys, and you make them sign the mutual jurisdiction agreements, so that and then you teach them that it's a promotion to wear a federal badge and have mutual jurisdiction.
Yeah, well, and you mentioned people being unaware, people don't know, forgotten, what have you, but then at the same time, it's still been reiterated and reconfirmed throughout modern history. It's like we're distracted on so many other things. Like you said, people don't know it because you have, what is that, Mac Prince v. U.S.?
Yeah, Mac Prince v. U.S., where the Supreme Court actually quotes Federalist 51 and Federalist 39.
Everything
and
you
confirms
just said.
everything that I'm saying.
So, and that was I don't remember the year exactly, but that was shortly after the Brady Bill.
Yes, well, it was in response to the Brady Bill.
Post Reagan shooting, then the Brady Bill, and the lawsuit was in response to the Brady Bill, and it was a couple of sheriffs that sued the federal government, and Mac Prince v. U.S., and basically the Supreme Court confirming, agreeing, and hearkening back to this history and saying, the federal government can't come in and make the sheriffs do their bidding. And that they can't use, federal government can't co-opt resources and just say, we're going to use this, we're going to do this, and pretty much confirm it.
Write that case down, y'all, so you guys get a copy of it and send it to your sheriff.
Rogers did. Obviously, nobody challenged him. He was not taken to the Supreme Court. The federal government didn't buck. He said, you have no authority to issue your warrants without my permission. I mean, the history, the facts, the Supreme Court, they all support this truth. Dragon's Talon says, Chris-Ann, why do you think they no longer teach civics in school? Why don't they want young people to know how the things are supposed to work? Well, let me answer that question very simply, Dragon's Talon. Because if we were teaching civics and knowing how government was supposed to work, we wouldn't be sitting here today looking at governors doing lockdowns for the flu.
You wouldn't have a podcast.
I wouldn't have a podcast.
There'd be no need.
Yeah, there'd be no need for my podcast.
They want.
We wouldn't have.
Alrighty, y'all. Video's long enough. There you go. Alright. This will be the People News. Hopefully you learned something. Just a reminder, I would go ahead and rewind this back a little bit. Get that Supreme Court case. Make a copy of it. And send it to your sheriffs. Alright. There you go. Alright. Till next time. Bye, y'all.